Hi guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called The Villainous Princess Wants to Live in a Gingerbread House. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! We are introduced to Princess Anastasia, a cute pink-haired little girl, as she enters a huge room full of judging eyes staring at her. She gets close to a pool full of water and dips a toe in, wishing she could go back to her family, or as she's already at the palace, at least get some chocolate treats. Anastasia has a flashback to when she was back home with her parents, a gorgeous pink-haired woman who's keen to hand labor and a blonde man who seems more prone to cooking. They were really poor, living in a broken-down house in the outskirts of a rural village. Nonetheless, Anastasia is dearly loved by her parents, as they did their best to give her the best life they could, sacrificing their own comfort to favor her own. Her parents are also quite particular in comparison to other commoners, as her mother has a talent for swordsmanship and her father was a painter and a musician in their spare time. Moreover, Anastasia has reincarnated into this life, so she doesn't have any friends her age, for she considers them to be too immature. One afternoon, a group of knights came to their house, and immediately her father picked up Anastasia and escaped through the back door with her as her mother fended them off with her sword. Unfortunately, they were stopped again, and the knights had gotten a hold of her mother. Anastasia cried out for her, as the knights announced that they were there to escort her, a princess, back to the castle. Presently, she's attending a spirit ceremony, an ancestral ceremony in which a spirit and a human make a contract. She's frightened as she finally starts tying two and two together, realizing she's reincarnated into the villainess of a novel she's read more than 10 years before her death, so she doesn't remember much about the events. She remembers that the story centers around one of the grandchildren of the emperor, Alexei, and a normal girl who fall in love and have to face a lot of obstacles to be together. Anastasia, Alexei's cousin, is one of those obstacles. She acquired a very strong spirit, so strong she even became a contender for the throne. She'd grown up poor because of her father, Prince Yuriev, had contracted a weak spirit and had had to leave the imperial family. So once she got a strong spirit, she made a lot of reckless decisions that led to her downfall. Our main character is completely appalled. She only wished to fulfill her dream of being a baker in this new life, but she sees that it won't be as simple as planned. The ceremony begins once Alexei and the emperor enter the room. It's finally time for Anastasia to go to meet her spirit, and we return to the initial scene of the story. She submerges herself in the pool, hoping to get a normal spirit so she can return to her rural life. However, she's met with a glowing and powerful bird spirit, which can transform into different things and ends up becoming a pin on her dress. She exits the room and is asked by a maiden what her spirit is, but she lies and tells her she doesn't know. However, the maiden goes to fetch Marquis Serenetev, who contracted with an insight spirit. Marquis Serenetev, or Maxim, has arrived to determine Anastasia's spirit. Once he approaches her and touches her forehead, he's faced with a blinding golden light coming from her. But he says she's been blessed with a small bird spirit. Anastasia's relieved but confused at the same time, not knowing why he's covering for her. The emperor then talks to each child, and when he reaches Anastasia, he's surprised to see how small and skinny she is for her age. Anastasia feels as though he looks at her with a distant look, but he's surprised once Anastasia tells him she's eager to return to her home. He then leaves, but Anastasia still can't return home. She's staying in the imperial palace and being looked after by a personal maid, Alexei. She's really kind to Anastasia, trying to comfort her about having to stay there by telling her her parents will arrive soon. She's trying to get Anastasia to go to sleep, telling her the faster she sleeps, the faster she'll meet her parents, as they have at least 5 days of travel from their village to the palace. Anastasia fakes going to sleep, as she doesn't want to trouble Alexei anymore. And so Alexei goes to help with the preparations for an upcoming banquet to celebrate the end of the war. She leaves, but Anastasia is left concerned after being told that Karnov Neustadter, Alexei's closest ally, will be attending said banquet. Anastasia remembers Karnov clearly from the novel. He's Alexei's closest friend and successor of the Neustadter family. He had a chance at the throne, but he gave it up to support Alexei, and ever since, every win he's had at war, he's accredited to Alexei and the crown. Moreover, Anastasia remembers how her character crossed paths with him plenty of times, and he was one of the main causes of her death. Therefore, Anastasia hopes she's long gone from the imperial palace before he arrived, so that they don't even have to cross paths once. Suddenly, her spirit appears in the form of a chick, and it nudges her to get out of bed and follow it. Confused, she's dragged by the hem of her nightgown by the spirit to the royal kitchen, where it spreads out cake ingredients before her. She's dumbfounded, but then remembers she wished to be able to have some cake when she was receiving the spirit, but she lashes out at the chick, afraid she'll get caught where she shouldn't be. She planned on not getting any attention, but thinking she'll never be able to use such high-quality ingredients ever again, she decides to give it a try and bake some cookies. Nonetheless, she's caught by the kitchen's head chef, who's furious at her and doesn't even let her finish telling him who she is before he yells at her to get out. The spirit then goes into action, attacking the chef and leaving him defeated on the ground. Anastasia takes this chance to negotiate with him, telling him she'll leave quietly if he lets her bake something, and he agrees to do so as long as she cleans up and keeps the chick in place. Anastasia starts ordering Pavel, the head chef, around the kitchen as if it were her own. He tells her he can teach her how to cook, but she simply sends him to boil some water as she heard he doesn't handle snacks, leaving him discouraged. After seeing her struggle cracking the eggs, he goes to her aid, also criticizing her choice of using chocolate as it's not a popular ingredient there due to its bitterness. Nonetheless, she brushes him off and continues to order him around while making her recipe. Once the mixture is done and ready to go into the oven, she remembers she forgot to preheat the oven. Arrogantly, Pavel tells her that they keep the oven on 24/7 in the imperial palace as the oven uses magic stones as a heat source, and it would require an enormous amount of them to start it up if it were to be turned off. After they're done baking, the snack turns out looking extremely gorgeous, leaving Anastasia impressed at herself as if it's her first time making it. Pavel is also really amazed at her, as she made this elaborate dessert even though it was her first time working with cream and sugar. They try it and are completely taken aback by its deliciousness, and after being asked what to name it, Anastasia decides to call it Pavel Chocolat, making him blush. Both of them leave the kitchen to look for oranges to bake a cake when a butler arrives looking for a snack to give to the emperor. Pavel's not there, but he finds some ramekins with Anastasia's desserts, and thinking Pavel left them behind in case the emperor got hungry, he takes some to him. In his chambers, the emperor is meeting with Alexei and discussing war affairs, particularly talking about their win of the war against the Noctis elves. He then asks Alexei why he spared the life of a 10-year-old slave, reminding him his parents were executed for bringing darkness and communicating with the elves so no one in the north would take him on, even as a servant, nor adopt him. Then, Alexei looks troubled as the emperor suggests the child and Anastasia stay together. He tries to take the slave himself, but the emperor has already decided. It's then that the butler bringing in Anastasia's cake arrives, and they are immediately intrigued upon tasting it. Back in the imperial kitchen, Pavel left Anastasia alone as soon as they returned and noticed that 2 of the ramekins were missing, and he left to go look for the cake thief. As she's waiting for him there, the butler barges in looking for Pavel in a hurry because the emperor has asked to speak to him after tasting Anastasia's cake. The butler is horrified as soon as he heard that Pavel didn't make the snack, as he thought it had been prepared for the emperor. And now the emperor is looking for the one who made the cake. Anastasia asks him if the emperor looked angry or upset, but the butler couldn't tell. So, afraid Pavel will get punished for something she baked, Anastasia tells the butler she's the one who baked the cake and tells him to take her to see the emperor. Once in the emperor's parlor, she admits to having baked the cake he ate as he looks at her with stone-cold eyes. Anastasia explains to him that she insisted Pavel let her to bake in this kitchen, as she wanted to make something for him before she left the imperial palace to return home. The emperor asks if her father taught her how to cook, but she tells him she never baked before as they were too poor, although she has a baking book with pictures she studied every day. He then asks her how she got the cake to have that color, when Anastasia notices like a colored aura around her grandfather. She answers that Pavel got some chocolate from Baron Saratov, so she used that. Anyhow, the emperor tells her that he'll be giving her a gift that'll be arriving in a few days. But Anastasia, not wanting to gather too much attention, tells him Pavel helped a lot and that she'll be returning home soon. Anastasia also notices the emperor's shawl shift, seeing an opaque thing coil around him. After Anastasia is escorted out of his room, the emperor starts talking to his spirit, Shamal, asking if Anastasia saw it. Shamal tells the emperor he was curious about her, so he got close, as she doesn't appear to be interested in the emperor at all and wants to return home most of all. This trait reminds the emperor of Uriel, his youngest son and Anastasia's father, who ran away from the palace. After being asked, Shamal tells the emperor Anastasia contracted the small bird spirit, even though he doesn't seem too convinced about it. Back in her room, Anastasia hears a voice talking back to her. It's the chick, her spirit, who finally introduces itself as the Great Sensory Spirit. Shocked, Anastasia asks the spirit why it hasn't spoken to her up until now, and annoyed, he tells her it's because she was too weak herself. Then, she asks him if he's the reason why she's been starting to see colors around people, and excitedly, the spirit tells her that those colors represent people's emotions, and that is one of many abilities she's gained from him. Stunned, Anastasia floods him with questions about how to use this ability, but the spirit cuts her off and tells her he doesn't know. Anastasia accuses the spirit of not knowing the answer she needs, but the spirit simply states that he doesn't need to know them and it's up to her to find them out, telling her that he's the reason she baked such a good cake in the kitchen, as the spirit can do anything that requires the senses. Excitedly, Anastasia informs him she'll be using him as a recipe book, saying how she'll use the imperial kitchen 10 more times before leaving the palace. The spirit tells her her ambitions are too low, but she explains that the only way to stay in the palace is to contract one of the spirit kings like the emperor or Alexei did. But her spirit huffs, telling her how their spirits always come to him for help. He then tries shifting into his full form again, but is dismayed to see he can't. Next morning, Anastasia's room is really hot and her spirit tells her it's the fault of Alexei's spirit, the fire spirit Fafnir, who can't control his power. She then shares some brownies she baked with her spirit, telling it she'll call him Phoebe, annoying him and leading him to start pecking at her. Anastasia grabs Phoebe and shakes him up, trying to get him to calm down, and demands that a set of rules are laid between them. She tells him that when he's in the form of a bird, he has to act like one. He has to transform into only that type of bird, and he can't tear her clothes. In reply, he asks her to never shake him again, and she has to bake sweets and give them to those around her every day. She tells him she can't do that every day as she's not allowed in the imperial kitchen, but he protests, telling her that eating her snacks will help humans communicate with their spirits. She still doesn't understand her spirit's plan, but he insists it's all for her own good. Right then, Alexei comes into her room and without being able to contain her excitement, tells her the emperor has decided to have her stay in the palace to receive an education until she becomes an adult, which devastates Anastasia. Alexei gets her all dressed up, telling her she'll go prepare her permanent room, which is situated right next to Alexei's. Anastasia tries hiding her disappointment to not trouble Alexei, but once Alexei is excused, she goes for a walk around the premises. Outside of the palace, she sees one of the other imperial grandchildren who received the rainwater spirit throw a fit while being kicked out of the palace in place of her. He's furious, and the moment he sees Anastasia, he starts charging towards her. Not knowing what to do, Anastasia literally feeds him one of her brownies, leaving him perplexed. The staff then come running towards them, asking them if they're okay. Dmitri, the boy, is stunned, demanding to know what she fed him. She boasts it's a sweet she made that was complimented by the emperor himself. And after Dmitri gets flustered after she insists on giving him more, he calms down. Anastasia is trying to help him get a hold of himself as his father, Maxim, always helped her family when in need. Dmitri stashes the brownie she gave him in his pocket, and she asks him to share some with Maxim when he returns home. Anastasia noticed that Dmitri calmed down pretty fast after she gave him her brownie, and Phoebe explains it's because her sweets have the power of improving people's moods. Alexei then hurries there with a purple aura of worry around her, asking if she's okay. Anastasia tries assuring her nothing happened, but Alexei's aura changes to crimson once she sees the staff that were present while Dmitri lunged at her, demanding to know why they didn't stop them. Nonetheless, Anastasia manages to calm her down and convinces her to go show her her new room. Once in the room, Anastasia's stunned by how spacious and luxurious it is. She's even more stunned to see a door connecting her room to Alexei's. And Alexei tells her that Alexei really wants to get close to her and asked for them to study together. Anastasia doesn't understand why her cousin wants to take classes with her, as she's really far behind compared to him. She enters the study to find him reading a book, feeling as though he's acting cold towards her. She tries addressing him by his title and even their heir familial relationship, but he's turning down everything she says until she directly calls him Alexei, making him shift and blush in surprise. Finally, she settles on calling him Alyosha. Their tutor then comes and they start studying, but as each has their own things to read, they don't speak at all, leaving Anastasia to wonder why he wants her there. She returns to her room, frustrated at the whole situation, and telling Phoebe Alexei dislikes her. She has a small box with some jewelry she's picking up in order to sell to get money to run away, but she doesn't even know where her home is. Phoebe tries calming her down, telling her that Dmitri dislikes her, but he's not sure about Alexei. And remembering how she handled the situation with Dmitri, Anastasia gets the idea to gain Alexei's friendship by baking him some sweets. She goes to the kitchen where she meets Pavel, and after some convincing, he lets her stay and practice cooking in his kitchen. He clearly has no idea she's an imperial grandchild, but she prefers it that way. Anastasia asks Pavel if there's any chocolate left over from yesterday, but he shyly admits he spent the night experimenting with it, so there's none left. After some thought, she decides she'll make something savory this time, asking him to give her cheese and bacon. She's trying to make some salty scones, but she needs some leavening agent in order to make them, and it yet doesn't exist at that time. Nonetheless, she remembers that baking powder can be made using baking soda found in stomach medicine of the time, tartaric acid, and starch powder in a ratio, Phoebe tells her. Thus, after making the baking powder, naming it Phoebe powder, she bakes the bacon and cheese scones, surprising even herself after seeing how well they rose in the oven. Pavel tries them and is moved by how delicious they are, even though Anastasia looks a bit concerned as she tells him they're for her cousin who grew up eating only the most exquisite foods. Pavel finds it strange that her cousin apparently grew up so rich and she is so poor, but he doesn't ask about it and rather assures her awkwardly and blushing that her cousin will love the scones. Thus, Anastasia wraps them up excitedly, satisfied with her plan to win her cousin over. Anastasia thinks that maybe she can start selling her baking powder in the kingdom, which will make her rich and able to afford a big house where her parents won't have to worry about her anymore. She thinks she'll have to open a factory, but she's trying to figure out how to get the funding she needs in order to do that. She quickly snaps out of it though, wanting to focus on adapting to the imperial palace first. She knocks all day long at Alyosha's door, meaning to give the scone to him, but he never answers. Late at night though, one of his guards answers for him and informs Anastasia he's busy studying. A bit disappointed, she gives the guard the scones and asks him to give them to Alyosha for her. Alexei's a bit surprised after receiving the scones from the guard, but he decides to have a try of it right then and there. He recalls how ever since contracting the Fire Spirit King, he's never been able to make friends or have a normal family, as everyone looked at him with jealousy, fear, and flattery. However, he saw something different in Anastasia's eyes and hopes to be able to befriend her. He tries the scone and is delighted by it, still not knowing she made it for him herself. A week later, it seems Anastasia's been giving him snacks every night through his guard Cyrillic, and she feels as though she is improving her relationship with Alyosha. This night, she goes to their connecting door to give Cyrillic the snacks as usual, but freezes on the spot when she sees Alyosha opening the door. He greets her warmly, but she's too stunned to speak. However, she snaps out of it once he grabs her hands. Alyosha playfully reprimands Anastasia for always asking Cyrillic to deliver her snacks to him for her. But stammering, she tells him it's because she doesn't want to disturb his study sessions. However, he insists, asking her if it's because she doesn't like him and even calling her a small p. Finally, telling her that it wouldn't be a bother at all to spare some time for her. Completely flustered, Anastasia tells him she doesn't want to play with him, breaking his spirit a little bit. But she hastily corrects herself, saying it's that she just wants him to enjoy the snacks and smile because of her a little bit. He replies by saying he always smiles when he sees her, but being brutally honest, she tells him she wants him to smile genuinely. After that, she completely shies away, scurrying to bed and leaving him behind with some more scones. While watching him train archery, Anna wonders when Alyosha takes a break, as he's constantly occupied. She comes across Cyrillic and asks him why he's not guarding Alyosha, who tells her it's because during the day, the fire spirit, Fafnir, is strongest, so he doesn't need any protection. Anna then asks him why Alyosha needs to train so hard if he's so protected, but the training is mostly for him to be able to control the power of Fafnir. She then gives Cyrillic some scones she made for Alyosha, telling him to take one for himself. He's surprised to learn she's been making these snacks herself, asking her if she likes Alyosha. She's a bit hesitant on what to answer, as she's convinced he doesn't like her back, but eventually she admits she doesn't dislike him, and she'd like to spend time with him as he's the only family she has around. And Cyrillic confesses that it's the same way for Alyosha. A week later, Anna is watching Alyosha train again and he offers to teach her. But the string is too hard for her to pull, making him tease her while she protests. In a more serious tone, he asks her if she doesn't feel too hot while being around him, as that's a consequence of Fafnir. In truth, it's because Phoebe's stronger than Fafnir, but not wanting to make him wary about her, she simply says it's because his power won't hurt allies. Alyosha's a bit confused, but Aisha insists, telling him it's like that in all the novels. He smiles at that wholeheartedly, which makes Aisha really excited to see. He's trying to cover his face up though, but she's pulling at his arm to reveal his smile, ultimately annoying him and leading him to push her to the ground. Aisha's shocked, not hurt at all, but never expecting that from him. He's even more terrified, trembling, but hastily turning away from her and apologizing. She asks him why he's angry at her, and he replies by telling her that he can't be angry while walking away. She runs after him, trying to understand why he can't show his emotions, and he tells her it's because of Fafnir. Until he becomes strong enough to control his power, he has to manage his emotions carefully to not cause an accident. Anna remembers from the novel that was the reason he went looking for the heroine, who had stabilizing powers. Once Alyosha leaves, Phoebe tells Anna that his reasoning is foolish, as the reason he's emanating heat is because Fafnir is excited, not because of his own emotions. Worried for him, Anna asks Phoebe what she can do to help him, and apart from giving him the snacks she makes, he tells her she can stay by his side and support him. Thus, Anna rushes to Alyosha's room and barges in. Not being able to hold it in anymore, Anastasia explains to him that it's Fafnir who can't control his emotions, particularly his excitement, and that's because he's radiating heat. She assures him that Fafnir wouldn't have picked him if he didn't think he was strong enough. She insists that it's safe for him to show his emotions, making him notice how nothing bad happened after he got angry at her, so there shouldn't be any issues in the future. Soberly, and with a blue cloud of sorrow enveloping him, he confides in her that the previous contractor of Fafnir had been his father who died when he was only 5. Supposedly, he was a person of intense emotions, which led him to lose control of Fafnir's power and die. Aisha remembers what actually happened to his father from the novel, and it's nothing like what he's saying. In fact, he used to be a sensitive man, and so the emperor didn't think him fit to be the king, while her father, the youngest prince, hadn't signed a contract with a spirit king, but was the smartest one, so the emperor wanted to make him future king. However, as soon as Nikolai, Alyosha's dad, came to know this, he became so sorrowful he threw himself into the pit of flames, and Aisha's dad left the palace after this. The emperor then kicked all the princes out and hurried Alexei's spirit ceremony, and after he contracted Fafnir, he appointed him crown prince. Aisha's trying to convince Alyosha that nothing bad will happen if he lets himself feel his emotions. When he starts crying, Aisha then jumps into his arms, hugging him tightly to let him know it's okay to feel his emotions around her. After that, Alyosha got an incredibly high fever. Trying to help him, Aisha goes to his room at night. There, she's surprised to be able to hear Fafnir speak to her. Phoebe gets annoyed at him, telling him not to speak to his contractor, but he's desperately trying to seek help to get Alexei to feel better. Apparently, he can talk to her thanks to the power she got after contracting Phoebe. And after some talk, she demands Fafnir to speak to Alexei to inform him that the reason it's always so hot is his own fault and not Alexei's. She then rushes to the kitchen to prepare a snack that'll help him get better. As medicine won't work on Alexei because of Fafnir, Aisha decides to make something for him that'll help him get better, assured by Phoebe that her snacks will work on him. She comes across Pavel in the kitchen, where she tells him that her cousin is sick, so she's gonna make something for him to feel better. She decides to do a ginger cordial, which is a concentrate made of fruits and sugar with boiled pears. She's gonna add cinnamon to the cordial as well, as it's good for colds, even though she really hates it. She then asks Pavel if he shouldn't be heading home already, but he says he'll stay as he's never seen anyone make ginger cordial before. Aisha apologizes for making him stay overtime, but he just laughs and pats her head. After the cordial is done, Phoebe tells Aisha to add milk to it as its taste is too strong. And the end product is so delicious she can't believe it contains cinnamon. She then rushes to Alyosha's room to give it to him, and luckily he appears to be awake. She goes to his bedside and makes him drink the cordial and apologizes for the creepy look the pears have, even though she tried making them cute. Surprised, Alyosha asks her if she made it, and she tells him she did, even showing him a cut she got while cooking and encouraging him to eat more to get better, feeding him the pears like a baby. However, he can't have more than a bite as he feels so bad, so Aisha helps him back into bed to sleep. The next morning, he's shocked to see Aisha fell asleep on his bedside. Concerned, Alyosha wakes Aisha up and asks her if she stayed there all night, but without skipping a beat, she asks him if he's feeling better, checking his temperature. She then gives him more of her ginger milk, telling him she stayed there because she was worried his fever would rise, and admitting she'll probably skip that day's classes because she's really tired. Shyly, Alyosha then asks her if she's hurt from when he pushed her, which reminds her that Fafnir has to speak to him to apologize for his actions. Aisha grabs a candle and demands Fafnir to give Alexei an apology, and even though Aisha can see and hear him apologizing, Alyosha doesn't seem to be able to hear anything, making Phoebe laugh at Fafnir. Confused, Alyosha asks Aisha if she can speak to spirits, and after some hesitation, she admits she can. Phoebe tells her that to get Alyosha to hear his spirit, she has to continue feeding him her food. After Alexei asks her what Fafnir said, she tells him about his apology. Alexei then asks her why she never told him she can speak to her spirit, and shyly, she says she didn't think anyone would care, and is cut off by him before she can tell him she doesn't want the throne. He seems very understanding, and later, once she's already left the room, Phoebe tells her that one of the powers she has is to be able to express truths without any misunderstandings, as long as she keeps feeding people her food. Sometime later, Aisha is waiting at the tea table for Alyosha to return from speaking with the Emperor when she finds a book talking about a place named Lumen Vasilise, and Phoebe informs her that there's a mine full of diamonds there. In his office, the Emperor is discussing the reinstatement of a former knight leader, Terji Nelen, after being 10 years off duty. The Emperor is asking Alexei for his opinion on whether to reinstate him or not, and Alexei reminds his grandfather of how loyal he was to him while fighting with him to secure the northern border, so he believes it'd be good to have him back. The Emperor then informs Alexei that Terji is actually the father of Aisha's mother, as Aisha's father married her 10 years ago and they fled together, making Terji disown her as well. Alyosha still insists on reinstating Terji, telling his grandfather it will help them with their negotiations with the elves, and his grandfather accepts his decision, even though he's a bit hesitant on his motives. Alexei returns to having tea with Aisha, and he tells her that he's trying to choose a land to take from the elves, as they're going to give it to them for having lost the wars. Aisha knows Lumen Vasilise has precious stones thanks to Phoebe, but she doesn't want to raise any suspicions towards herself for knowing that. Thus, she slyly suggests he takes that land, as Alexei himself said that all lands appear to have the same benefits. He teases her about being able to talk to Fafnir, but in truth, he still can't communicate with his spirit. Moreover, there seems to be a victory ball coming up, and Alyosha tells the maid that he'll gift Aisha a dress for it. As a thanks to helping him choose the land, Alyosha tells Aisha he wants to gift her another thing, and as it's impossible for her to return home, the next best idea that comes to her mind is to ask for a birdcage. As they enjoy some scones she made, Alyosha also informs her about the reinstatement of Terje. She doesn't seem to know he's her maternal grandfather and is left utterly shocked when he tells her so. When Alexei was young, Aisha's father came to visit him at night to say his goodbyes, telling him sorrowfully that he won't be able to see him again because he cares for him deeply. Therefore, he's telling Aisha that her parents won't be able to come see her while she's in the imperial palace, and so she'll have to wait until the emperor lets her leave to see them again. He explains that that's why he thought of bringing Terje back, as she'll be able to have some family close by in the meantime. However, Aisha doesn't seem to be too keen on the idea, insisting she has him as family and that as long as he's there, she won't be lonely, moving him deeply. However, he stops himself while reaching out to touch her, grabbing his arm while telling her that it's unavoidable that he comes now, so that if Terji makes her uncomfortable in any way, she should tell him. Some days later, the party of knights that defeated the Noctis elves arrived at the palace. Aisha's pretty nervous about meeting Karnov Nusdatter, as he's the one who killed her in the original novel, but Alyosha's pretty excited to see him as he's his only friend, telling Aisha he'll befriend her as well. The Emperor hears Aisha call Alexei Alyosha and asks about it, and she cutely explains that he wouldn't have her call him anything other than that nickname, even making Alyosha uncomfortable by forcing him to call her Aisha in front of the Emperor. Everything falls silent as the knights enter the throne room, and amidst all that, Pavel, who's in the crowd, sees Aisha sitting in one of the imperial seats. She waves at him, thinking she'll have a lot of explaining to do later. After the knights introduce themselves, Aisha stands up to leave and let Alyosha and Karnov have a heart-to-heart without her interference. But she trips on her shoe and is caught from behind by Alexei right before falling. Alyosha then tells Aisha that he'll carry her to the palace if she's hurt, picking her up and carrying her around princess style. Aisha gets really embarrassed, demanding he puts her down, but he insists. That's when they come across Marquis Valery Shapiraquin, another one of their uncles. Alyosha's treatment towards him is ice cold, and Valery doesn't seem to like how close Aisha and Alyosha seem to be. His son Ilya is not present at the ceremony as he seems to be ill frequently. Moreover, Aisha remembers him from the original novel and remembers how he used to fill her character's head with manipulative gossip, so she wants to stay as far away from him as she possibly can. On the other hand, Valerie makes a comment to Aisha about calling Alexei Alyosha, telling her that she has to respect proper etiquette. This really angers Alexei, who harshly tells Valerie he has to respect etiquette towards him but not Aisha, making him even more displeased, and then leaves him standing there. As Alyosha carries her to the palace, Aisha feels true warmth from him. They are honestly so cute together. Later on, as Aisha and Alyosha are having tea, Alyosha confronts Aisha about her not wanting to attend the victory ball. In truth, it's because she's really afraid of talking to Karnov, fearing he'll hate her and want to kill her. But she simply says it's because she thinks it'll be boring. Right then, Karnov unexpectedly enters the room looking to chat with Alexei. But upon noticing Aisha is there, his face instantly turns stone cold. Phoebe insists to Aisha that she approach Karnov and go talk to him, even telling her to hug him, making Aisha become extremely confused. Karnov tells Alexei he has to speak to him privately, so Alexei excuses himself to Aisha for a bit while they go outside to speak. There, Karnov notices how much Alexei has changed and how he seems to be smiling more. He asks about Aisha, and Alexei explains to him that she's his cousin and was allowed to stay by the Emperor after she contracted the bird spirit. Karnov seems a bit wary of her, asking Alexei if she sees him as her only cousin, and Alexei tells him she does. However, he's worried people with ill intentions will start trying to take advantage of her once they learn she's so close to Alexei, so he asks Karnov for help in protecting her. After they return from their talk, Phoebe still insists to Aisha that she go talk to him, but after Karnov throws an icy look her way, she desists. It's finally time for the victory ball, and Lisey is helping a very reluctant Aisha to get ready. She insists she isn't going to go, but still, she's all dressed up and ready for the event when Alyosha goes to pick her up at her room. He convinces her to go in the end, but he's called by the Emperor before he can escort her there, so she ends up entering the ballroom alone. Actually, Aisha remembers from the novel that in that ball, her character made a lot of fake friends who only wanted to reap power off of her instead of actually helping her. So that's why she's so reluctant to go. Nonetheless, she enters the ball and everyone starts gossiping about her. That's until Karnov approaches to greet her, and everyone falls silent as it seems they are all fearful of Karnov. Phoebe starts playing matchmaker as soon as he sees Karnov approach Aisha, telling her to grab his hand and talk to him and even kiss him. He tells her it's for the best in the world, but she doesn't understand what he means, so she simply ignores him and greets Karnov as Lord. She becomes very uncomfortable as he stands next to her without even saying a word, so she tries making him go away by telling him Alyosha will soon come after speaking to the Emperor. He doesn't seem to care at all, but corrects her after she calls him Lord again, telling her that it's wrong for her to address the Crown Prince through a nickname, but refer to him through his honorary title. Then, he tells her it'd be best for her to leave the Imperial Palace as soon as she can, so that she doesn't attract any person that may try to use her to gain power. Aisha understands he's trying to protect Alyosha, but after he tries telling her to stay away from him, she snaps and confronts him without beating around the bush. She tells him that she won't befriend anyone other than Alyosha or him, even teasing him about becoming best friends with him if it'll calm him down. Annoyed, he tells her not to get close to him, but he has to leave her behind suddenly after a loud clash is heard from somewhere in the ballroom. It's then that Maxim appears, greeting Aisha from behind. He asks her about her time adapting to the palace, and she tells him she's fine because she has Alyosha. After he gifts her a headband, she asks him about his insight powers, remembering how he'd identified her spirit as a small bird spirit. Maxim admits to her that his power allows him to have good perception of the world, even if it may be wrong, telling her he did recognize a powerful spirit contracting her, but as he couldn't identify it, he said it was a small bird to buy her some time. It's then that Alexei appears, and with a gloomy atmosphere about him, he picks up Aisha in his arms, asking Maxim if he's been bothering her. Aisha's surprised but excited to see Alyosha, who's throwing daggers at Maxim with his eyes. Maxim protests at this, telling him how he's still acting cold towards him, but he notices how he should watch his words, as Alyosha seems very protective of Aisha. Maxim tries patting Aisha's head as a goodbye, but Alyosha quickly slaps his hand away, making the air tense between them. Maxim then tells Aisha he has something her parents sent to her from home, explaining how her father has his reasons for not being able to go see her in the palace. After a moment's silence, Aisha smiles warmly, telling him she knows and it's all right as long as they are well themselves. Maxim smiles and leaves, and Alyosha then takes Aisha out to get some fresh air and speak. He insists to her that anytime anyone makes her uncomfortable or bothers her, she can leave, asking her if she was waiting for him to come to her rescue. Aisha makes him note that she never asked him to rescue her, telling him no one bothered her, not even Valerie. She then reflects on Valerie's comment about her calling him Alyosha, and she tells Alexei he might be right. But Alexei immediately cuts her off, telling her that she should never call him Crown Prince and not to listen to Valerie. He then laughs at Aisha, and Aisha tells him she won't call him Crown Prince, but asks him in return to let her get away from the banquet. He immediately accepts, and so she scurries off away from the party. Karnov has been listening to all of this, and Alyosha asks him jokingly if Aisha cried after talking to him. Karnov remains sober, telling him she probably doesn't know what his spirit is. Alexei then asks him to go check if Aisha returns safely to her room, and reluctantly, he agrees. Afterwards, Alexei returns to the party. Anastasia then goes to the palace's kitchen to make something for herself as she's feeling hungry. She notices the kitchen's empty, so she figures everyone must be helping prepare the victory banquet in the main palace hall. Nonetheless, it's not long after that Pavel enters the kitchen, completely shocked to see Aisha now that he knows her true identity. He demands to know why she never told him she's the imperial grandchild. But Aisha retorts that she tried telling him that the first time, but he cut her off before he had heard her full last name. Yelling, he then apologizes for his previous behavior, and Aisha cuts him off so that he'd finally shut up. After that, she asks him about the basket full of eggs he has, and he tells her he left the victory banquet because it was too boring. So his attendants gave him a basket of eggs they won't use in the banquet. Hungrily, Aisha then tells him she'll teach him how to make egg sandwiches. Thus, after they make the mayonnaise and prepare the sandwiches, they eat them together. Pavel is impressed at Aisha once again, asking her where she got the recipe from. She can't tell him from her previous life, so she lies and tells him she got it from a book. It's then that a gorgeous woman, Baroness Saratov, the one who gave Pavel the chocolate, comes into the kitchen to thank him for giving her product such a good and popular use. She thought she'd go bankrupt, but thanks to his cake, more like Aisha's cake, but oh well, she has a new business prospect and wants his help to train bakers into preparing it so that she can open a patisserie. Aisha looks at the contract but is not convinced by the offer of only 10 million karas and 30% of the profits. Aisha starts negotiating with the Baroness, telling her that without their chocolate cake, her southern trade route would go bankrupt, so she should be more generous with her offer. Aisha goes even further, telling her that without their recipe, her chocolate is useless and will not sell. Therefore, Aisha tells her that without her recipe, she's doomed, so she'll have to up her offer. The Baroness tries playing cocky, telling her someone else will replicate it. But Aisha reminds her that the only one who may know the ingredients apart from them is the Emperor, leaving her completely defeated. Thus, after some more negotiating, the Baroness ends up agreeing to give them 30 million karas and 50% of the net revenue of the cake. Completely defeated, she asks Pavel who the kid is, and is horrified to learn she's the imperial grandchild. Blissfully, Aisha leaves the kitchen and is surprised to see Karnov waiting outside for her, and he tells her he'll escort her to her room. As they're walking there, Aisha asks him why he left the banquet, as it's mostly in his honor. But he blatantly says it's because he doesn't want to be celebrating how he killed thousands, adding that people's moods get gloomy once they see him and realize what they're really celebrating. They keep walking, and Aisha gives Karnov a sandwich. He accepts it, but doesn't eat it yet, so Aisha thinks of lending him the basket once he leaves her at her room. They finally get there, and Karnov hastily turns away to leave. But as Aisha's grabbing his sleeve to give him the basket, he slaps her hand away and throws her to the ground. Aisha is left stunned on the floor, but she's even more surprised to see how shocked Karnov looks, not being able to recognize the color of the atmosphere that's engulfing him. She stands up, telling him she intended to lend him the basket and apologizes if she startled him, but he simply helps picking up the broken sandwiches, saying it's fine. Aisha becomes really sad about it, and trying to hold back her tears, she excuses herself and goes into her room. Soon after, she falls incredibly ill. Alyosha goes to visit her, scolding her for having asked to leave the banquet earlier only to fall ill. He sits by her side, nursing her, and accompanies her until she falls asleep, telling her to get better soon so that he can give her another present. It's already been 3 days since the banquet, but Aisha's still ill. To her surprise, Karnov comes to visit her bearing a bouquet of flowers. Her maid seems extremely nervous around Karnov, making Aisha wonder why. He tells Aisha he came to see how she's doing and to apologize for his rudeness the other day, but Aisha appears to be quite mad at him. Remorseful, Karnov tells her that he'll help her in any way he can, and so, in a heartbeat, Aisha's already up and dressed, ready to go somewhere with Karnov. They're heading to the kitchen as Aisha asks Karnov to help her cook. She's still trying to tease him as a payback for pushing her the other day, so she convinces him to piggyback her all the way to the kitchen. Once on his back, she's surprised to see how strong he actually is, while he tells her he's instead surprised of how easily she'll give up her shame in order to inconvenience him. They're kinda cute together, not gonna lie. Once they arrive at the kitchen, Pavel is horrified to see Karnov entering alongside Aisha. He's so afraid of him he stutters as he speaks, telling Aisha he can help her in the kitchen so there's no need for Karnov to be there. Aisha insists, and so they all start making dacquoise together. They turn out beautifully, and Aisha offers Karnov some for him to try, but he still seems unwilling to try her cooking. However, after guilt-tripping him on having pushed her the other day, he agrees to try one. Aisha also offers Pavel some, but he doesn't seem too excited either. So Karnov takes it from Aisha's hand and excuses Pavel. Karnov wants to be alone with her to tell her what his spirit is so that she understands why everyone fears him. But before he can tell her himself, she interrupts him, telling him she knows he contracted the death spirit. This leaves him speechless, and Aisha can't understand the color around him. He can't grasp why she'd be so calm around him knowing that. Phoebe then comments to Aisha that he must have had a really hard life because of people's prejudices towards his spirit, telling her it's not even the death spirit he's contracted. Pavel returns with drinks for both of them, and after taking them from him, Aisha excuses herself and Karnov from Pavel, telling him something urgent came up. Then, Aisha tells Karnov to help her carry their cookies and their drinks as they take a stroll. As they're walking, Aisha asks Phoebe about Karnov's real spirit, and he tells her that he actually contracted the time spirit and not the death spirit. Realizing how alone Karnov must have felt while growing up because of everyone avoiding him due to his spirit, she looks at him in compassion and literally forces a cookie down his mouth. Her social skills always amaze me. She tells him she wants him to try what they made together, but he simply says he whisked the egg whites. But he tells her it's not bad. Then, Aisha offers him to take half the cookies, but he tells her she should take them all as no one would like something he made. Aisha tries convincing him that it's no big deal, but she knows that's not true. She remembers his tragic backstory from the novel, but never paid much attention to it up until now. So she bluntly tells him that they are just cookies he made with washed hands, so she doesn't see any issues there. Thus, she tells him to accompany her to her room so she can get some paper to wrap half of the cookies up for him. However, her ankle is actually really hurt, so she ends up being carried by Karnov the rest of the way while she notices him being surrounded by a blissful blue color. Back in his home villa, he's welcomed by his staff and parents, who all look terrified of him. His father tries scolding him for being late, but he's so frightened he's shivering and stammering. He pays no attention to him though, interrupting him to say that his grandmother is ordering them to return to the fief now that the war is over, and then leaving for his room. There, he lies on his bed and blushes while thinking of Aisha and her openness towards him. Aisha's quite bored while sitting before the Emperor in her room, when she catches a glimpse of the wind spirit and even pokes it playfully when her grandfather suddenly calls her. She's intrigued to see the Emperor surrounded by the color of worry as he asks her how she's feeling, and timidly, she tells him she's fine and offers him some of the cookies she made with Karnov. As he munches on one, she then expresses to him how the classes he's been making her take feel like they're more meant for Alexei than for her, asking him if she can learn something else. He tells her the classes are not only for Alexei, telling her she also has to learn to be able to handle the Empire's business. However, she tells him that rather than always worrying about the citizen's future, he should also worry about Alyosha, reminding him that he's in fact his grandfather and he's been alone and with no family ever since he was little. Finishing off by saying that focusing on her as a possible spare for Alyosha is not in his favor. After that, the Emperor asks everyone to leave him alone, and she tells him that he should look after and encourage Alexei more. It's then that he brings out an envelope from Baroness Saratov that was sent to her regarding their deal to sell the chocolate cake recipe. He tells her that he'll buy it from her himself for that same price, but rather than accepting, Aisha asks him what he wants it for. Not even letting him reply, she starts fantasizing about cooking together in the kitchen, telling him it'll be fine as they'll seem like grandfather and granddaughter playing together. He corrects her, telling her that they are in fact family, asking her why she calls him His Majesty rather than grandfather. He gets offended at her elusiveness and ends up giving her everything she asked for, but she cuts him off, telling him there's something else she wants. So he tells her he'll grant her wish only if she calls him properly. Aisha's quite lost at what the Emperor might mean, so she awkwardly bows to him while calling him his whole honorary title. A dark gray fog immediately engulfs him, and Aisha doesn't understand why he's not happy with her answer after he abruptly leaps. Girl, he just wants to be called Grandpops, please! She then receives the cage Alexei promised to gift her, but Phoebe doesn't seem satisfied with it. She tells him she'll have Alexei put a warm cushion in it, but after she teases him too much, he goes away offended. It's then that Alexei appears to change her ankle bandages. There's a knock at the door, and Alexei is shocked once she sees what's behind it. And once she goes to inspect what shocked Alexei so much, Aisha is so shocked herself that even she shuts the door closed. Apparently, the slave the Emperor had talked about with Alexei all that time back has finally arrived, and it seems he's a gift from the Emperor to Aisha for baking him the chocolate cake. Aisha's shocked at how a person can become a gift, but she can't refuse him as it's from the Emperor. Thus, she lets him in, but she notices that there's no color around him, as if he feels nothing. She asks for his name, and after he tells her they used to call him Trash, Aisha decides to give him a new name. She's trying to be friendly to him, but he's not responding at all. Finally, she kneels before him and takes off his collar, asking him if he'd like the name Ivan. He nods, and Aisha asks Alexei to prepare a warm bath and new clothes for him, then asking him to pick some flowers so they can arrange them together in the room. After they're gone, Aisha goes to the imperial kitchen to prepare some apple jam cookies for Ivan. Just when she and Pavel are about to place them into the oven, Alyosha comes into the kitchen looking for her. As soon as Alexei enters the room, the candles become brighter because of Fafnir, as he's still trying to catch his attention by telling Aisha to talk to him for him. After noticing this, Alexei apologizes for Fafnir and proceeds to start teasing Aisha for having flour on her face. She asks him what he's here for, and he tells her he went looking for her to give her a present as well, but he instantly picks her up and sits her on the counter, checking on her swollen ankle and scolding her for coming to the kitchen to bake in spite of it. Thus, he makes her promise not to come into the kitchen to bake anymore until her ankle is healed. And even though he has offered some resistance by her, she finally agrees to stop him from teasing her further. There's a dark smoke coming from the oven, and it seems the cookies have burnt because of Fafnir, making Aisha really angry at him. Fafnir tries blaming the magic stones, but Aisha is furious, insulting him directly. Sweet Pavel tries to cover for Aisha as he doesn't know if Alexei knows she can speak to spirits, even less so if it's actually true. Nonetheless, he gives it his all to try to convince Alexei that Aisha's talk just now was child's play, and Alexei finally cuts him off, telling him he already knows about her ability, but congratulating him for being so trustworthy. Alexei then takes his leave, telling her he'll leave his guard by the door to take her back to her room. After he's gone, while they bake a second batch of cookies, Pavel asks her if she really can talk to spirits, and is amazed to see she can. Of course, Alexei made him promise to keep this between the three of them only. While being carried back to her room by the guard, he tells her everyone's pretty worried about her sprained ankle, and the reason Alexei actually went to visit her was to check if she was okay in the kitchen. She feels a bit guilty then, saying she'll apologize to everyone. Back in her room, Aisha gives Ivan the cookies she made for him, noticing also how he's so skinny, and his skin seems to be a pale shade of blue. It's just then that Alyosha comes in as well, looking to have tea with her while sharing the jam cookies she gave him. As they sit down, he asks her who the kid is, and she tells him it's Ivan, a gift from the Emperor to her. Worried for her, he tells her to tell him if anything happens, which leaves her a bit confused. Aisha then asks him if he was busy today, and he informs her that that's the last day he'll be able to rest, as he'll be preparing for the arrival of delegators from the Noctis Elves in spring. Therefore, he tells her he's arranged for Karnov to come every evening to play with her, making her anxious. On a different note, her parents' letter and her things from her home have finally arrived. In the letter, they tell her they won't be able to go to her for the time being, asking for her understanding. They also mention a musician that used to come to their home often when Aisha was living there named Arten Ivanov, telling her he'd play at the banquet receiving the Noctis Elves delegation so she can go to him to look for a familiar face. Finally, they tell her they love her very much and to stay away from the Emperor as much as possible. She replies to them, telling them about all the friends she's made, but referring to them in code, also mentioning all the things she's been cooking and how she's become close to Alyosha. Aisha's most excited to be able to finally get her recipe book back, dreaming of one day selling the recipes she's made to buy a big house to live in with her parents. Phoebe wakes her up in the middle of the night as he feels as though there's something dangerous in her closet. She finds it's closed with a lock and key, and after Phoebe's insistence, she opens it up, stunned to see a room and Ivan in it. As soon as he sees her, he kneels, but Aisha tells him it's not necessary. He tells her that the attendants told him this was his room, while Phoebe informs her, extremely agitated, that he's a Noctis elf, asking what he's doing there as they can't come out of the north. As Phoebe keeps looking at him, he notices he's not only an elf, but half human, half elf, and he becomes appalled by his existence. Aisha tells him it's not that deep, but he insists, insinuating it's sort of a natural aberration. He then senses Ivan has frastille inside of him. He explains a frastille is a fragment of the blade of sin, and there are 4 left in total in the world after a 5th one was destroyed. Adamantly, he tells Aisha they have to fix him. He explains that Noctis elves have the ability to cut out their emotions and thoughts, and he did just that to himself, but is now unable to return to normal. He's lost his ability to express and speak for himself, so Phoebe tells Aisha that they have to help him get back, so she has to feed him more of her baked goods and stay close to him. After that is dealt with, he'll take care of the fractilles lodged inside Ivan's heart himself. Aisha decides to start by improving Ivan's living situation, so the next morning she heads to the Emperor's office to have an audience with him. After waiting a long time, she's finally able to get to see him. She greets him and gives him one of her apple jam cookies, which he immediately eats half of. He looks both happy and disappointed after receiving the cookie, and Aisha's still unable to understand what upsets him about her. The Emperor then asks her what she wants, even referring to her cookie as a bribe for him. Aisha feels her grandfather's being mean to her, and so the Wind Spirit gives her some tips, telling her to call him something other than His Majesty. Finally, she calls him Grandpa for the first time, making him radiate a color of happiness. After she got her grandfather all prepped up, she makes a request to have Ivan become a commoner rather than a slave so that he can be her personal attendant. The Emperor looks intrigued by this, but he explains that not even commoners or knights can become attendants, also mentioning how Alexei used to be a friend of her mother's before she got married. She tries other proposals to elevate Ivan's statue, but they're all turned down, so she resorts to the old and trusty puppy eyes. Unable to refuse them, the Emperor agrees to make Ivan a commoner from now on. Aisha then jumps up in excitement, falling to the ground after hurting her ankle again, which causes the Emperor to jolt up in worry. She assures him she's fine, and the Wind Spirit talks to her again, telling her to come visit more often as her grandfather often misses her. Back in her room, Aisha is being scolded by Alexei for hurting her ankle again, and further so, for going to request something from the Emperor without consulting with her first. Alexei is even more surprised when she hears Aisha ask the Emperor to make Ivan a commoner, and her worry increases as Aisha tells her she wishes to move Ivan's room somewhere else, and let him learn something of his choice in the mornings. Aisha asks Ivan what he would like to learn, but he's still neutral on everything. So Aisha decides to have him learn swordsmanship, as she thinks that a healthy body will help heal his soul. Aisha then goes to the kitchen to tell Pavel her ankle is healed, but she finds him sitting in a cloud of gloom. She asks him what the problem is, and it seems that he has been put in charge of preparing the desserts for the reception of the Noctis Elves delegation. And it's the season of the year in which the Noctis Elves don't consume any products derived from cows, as their founding legend says that the first Noctis Elf got to the north while riding a sacred cow. Thus, without the possibility of using any dairy products, Pavel has no idea what to prepare for their desserts. Aisha helps him see the bright side, as she's sure that if he's able to make a great dessert, he'll become an even more renowned chef, assuring him that she'll help him by bringing an amazing recipe. Back in her room, Aisha's brainstorming ideas on dairy-free desserts. She then decides to investigate the Noctis Elves, and she learns they live around a basin named Yub-Wisan. Their leader is randomly selected, and they have a very close bond with nature. Noticing Phoebe's aggressiveness towards them, Aisha asks him why he dislikes them so much, and he says they've committed a sin by separating heaven and earth. Phoebe explains that originally, humans and spirits live separately. Humans living on Earth and spirits in the sky, but some humans and spirits had a different idea and decided to separate the Earth and the sky, so the spirits weren't able to rise up to heaven. It happened because some humans decided to use the spirit's powers to become owners of the land, becoming emperors. The sword that divided heaven and earth is the blade of sin, and the split ended up causing darkness to be created. This darkness and the blade of sin affected humans and spirits, and to stop it, they were able to break the blade into 5 pieces and seal the darkness in the north. Some humans and spirits had to take responsibility for looking after the seal that's keeping darkness away. But the conditions of the north are so harsh, humans and spirits ended up merging with each other, becoming Noctis elves. Their religion really glosses over their true origins, and Aisha wonders why they'd make up that story about the sacred cow that make them not have dairy products during Noctis. Finally, she comes to the conclusion that the elves must be lactose intolerant, thinking she'll now have to ask for Ivan's meals to not contain any dairy. Concluding their aversion to dairy cannot be helped, Aisha looks through her old recipe book and finally finds a recipe that doesn't contain any dairy. As she's rushing to the kitchen to share her recipe with Pavel, Aisha comes across Karnov and Gilhaman Elman Shirivra, the commander of the Northern War. She hides behind a wall as soon as she sees them, but is startled by Karnov leaning over her. After greeting them, she asks them what they're doing there, and after some bickering between Aisha and Karnov, the commander wisely decides to take his leave and leave the two of them alone. He knows what's up. Aisha then grabs Karnov's hands, making him nervous while she tells him about the ordeal with the desserts for the delegation. She then asks him to help her and Pavel in the kitchen preparing them, and after some guilt-tripping from Aisha, Karnov finally agrees and follows her to the kitchen. Karnov's convinced that he'll make Pavel uncomfortable by being there, but Aisha insists that if he wants to befriend him, they should spend more time together. Karnov then tells her that Sir Elman wants him to give a guest lecture at Vychegda Academy, and Aisha asks him why he doesn't want to do it. He tells her he's not looking forward to teaching a bunch of people who think they'll die if he dislikes them. Karnov then asks her why she's getting involved with Pavel's issues, and she admits she feels a bit responsible for Pavel being in that uncomfortable situation. Karnov corrects her, telling her that Pavel is actually the son of Duke Petrov, a noble that is extremely loyal to the crown. So Pavel most likely ended up responsible for the desserts because his father's political enemies, who dislike his loyalty, must have pulled some strings to make him look bad. This only fires Aisha up even more, as she now figures it's not only an offense against Pavel, but against the crown itself. So she decides to make a carrot cake and leave everyone wowed. However, even though she has the cake already planned out, the problem of how to decorate it remains, as they can't use whipped cream. Once they arrive at the kitchen, Pavel looks terrified to see Karnov once again. Aisha tells Pavel Karnov's come to help them in the kitchen, but he seems a bit reluctant to let him stay. Aisha notices Pavel's behavior and excuses herself and Pavel from Karnov a second while she scolds him for being so rude towards him and accuses him of discriminating against him because of his spirit. Therefore, she drags Pavel back to Karnov and orders him to apologize to him. Pavel tries apologizing, but he's so terrified of Karnov he can't utter a coherent sentence out. Aisha tries alleviating the situation by playfully poking Karnov's cheek, making him a bit flustered after telling him he can poke hers if she wants. This eases Pavel's tension, and he finally realizes Karnov's just another kid and apologizes normally, causing Karnov to become phased. Aisha shows Pavel the carrot cake recipe, but he explains to her that the cake might be too rudimental for the fine palate of the nobles, and might cause them to get offended as it's originally a cake invented by poor people. However, Aisha responds that it's a cake that'll surely be liked by the Noctis elves, as they like living humbly in nature. Karnov agrees with Aisha's points, but Pavel's worried the head chef will not allow it. Aisha's unfazed, saying she'll get the Emperor's and the Crown Prince's permission for the cake, which will oblige the head chef to accept it. Thus, the three of them get to work on the cake. Meanwhile, the main palace's head chef is talking to one of his sous chefs, who's expressing his worries regarding the dessert being placed in Pavel's care, as there are rumors circulating that Pavel didn't make the famously congratulated desserts, but rather, it was Aisha who made them. This outrages the head chef, as he won't believe a 10-year-old can outmatch his cooking. Moreover, the head chef also appears to be working with Valerie, as he took an interest in him and asked him to outshine Pavel no matter what. Back in Pavel's kitchen, Aisha asks Pavel if he can contact Baroness Saratov, as she needs something from her. Meanwhile, Alyosha's meeting with the commander that led the kingdom to their victory in the Northern War, congratulating him and thanking him for the hardships he endured in the north. Nonetheless, the commander tells him that there were no actual hardships, as the battle ended in less than 30 minutes thanks to Karnov's spirit. Originally, many thought the Emperor was mad for designating a 15-year-old boy for deputy commander, but they were shown wrong once witnessing his power. The 30 minutes were given by Karnov to allow the Noctis to retreat, as he then ended all of them by just raising his arm. Nonetheless, the commander's still a bit worried for Karnov, as he is in fact just a 15-year-old, so that's why he's been insisting him to become a lecturer at the Wretched Academy. Moreover, the commander comments to Alyosha he's noticed Karnov becoming close to Aisha, noting she's the only person he's ever seen Karnov rush to see. Alyosha then tells him that he knows about this, adding that as she's his only cousin, he won't forgive anything or anyone who makes her cry. Aisha's thinking of replacing the carrot cake's typical cream cheese frosting with one made out of walnut butter and coconut cream. Nonetheless, there's not enough coconut cream to decorate the whole cake, so she thinks of making oat milk to make a sort of custard and add that to the coconut cream as well. As she doesn't like cinnamon, they bake 2 cakes, one decorated with cinnamon and one without. Pavel then asks Aisha why her recipe book is only filled with baking recipes, and she admits to him that she loves baking cakes. She explains that it's her way to show others her appreciation, much like some give out flowers. After the cakes are done, the 3 of them try them, and to Aisha's disappointment, the one with cinnamon is the most popular one. Aisha then thinks of giving some cake to Ivan for him to try, thinking maybe he can shed some light into the preferences of the Noctis elves. After trying it, Ivan becomes a bit distressed and even ends up with an upset stomach. This worries Aisha as she thinks there might be something wrong with the cake, but Phoebe tells her it's not his stomach that's sick, but rather the cake she made finally started awakening some emotions in Ivan. It seems the food Aisha makes is finally having an effect on Ivan, and Phoebe asks her if Ivan's been in fact eating the things she gave him previously, as it'd be odd that this was the first time they had an effect if he'd been eating them before. Karnov enters the room and asks Aisha why Ivan's there as soon as he sees him. She explains to him how the Emperor gave him to her, but it seems like Karnov knows him from his time in the north, but refuses to say anything about it. Karnov then tells Aisha to not get too close to slaves, but when Aisha asks why, Karnov dismisses it and changes the subject. Then, after Karnov refers to her as Your Highness, Aisha gets a bit mad, telling him to drop the honorifics and simply call her Aisha, and after blushing a bit, he agrees to call her that in private. In the main palace's kitchen, the main chef has just tried the carrot cake Aisha and Pavel made and is dismayed to learn that it is in fact delicious. Pavel's there as well, waiting for the head chef's verdict on the cake. The head chef is in distress as Pavel will definitely outshine him with that cake, and he can't refuse him as Alexei himself went to speak to him to tell him to leave the dessert in Pavel's hands. After Pavel asks the head chef how he liked it, he can't help but compliment it. Pavel is then honest with him, confessing that in fact the recipe for that cake was created by Aisha, disconcerting the head chef. Back in Aisha's room, Alexei is trying to bribe Aisha with a cute dress to convince her to attend the inauguration ceremony of the Knight Commander, her maternal grandfather. Alexei also tries tricking her, telling her they're just going to go for a walk, but she doesn't buy it. She tries the honesty tactic, telling her she may finally meet her maternal grandfather, but Aisha's not interested in meeting him, saying he had 10 years to see her before, so if he wants to know her, he can come and look for her himself. Thus, Aisha goes to read a book alone in the palace's patio when she's startled by Karnov, who appears behind her. Karnov has heard she refuses to attend the inauguration ceremony of the Knight Commander, and Aisha asks him if he won't go either. He tells her he'll just make everyone faint, and after calling her a little pea, Aisha starts protesting and lightly hitting Karnov when he grabs her hands and tells her he'll be really sad if he can't see her. Aww. However, Aisha misses the point entirely and tells him they'll see each other in the evening. But he protests, saying she's already asleep then. He insists, asking her why she won't attend the ceremony, and she jokingly replies that if she does, he'll kill her, which makes him worried. Nonetheless, Aisha knows that he didn't in fact contract the death spirit, but rather the time spirit, so she debates whether to tell him the truth. She decides not to, and instead tries convincing him that the reason why she's not going is not because of his spirit, but because of her grandpa, whom she doesn't want to meet. Aisha then asks Karnov if his grandparents will come too, and he tells her he has a grandmother in the Northern Territory, but is unable to tell her if the both of them are close or not. Aisha's all dressed up for the welcoming of the Noctis Elves delegation, but Phoebe is not happy at all that the elves, who he considers to be sinners, are coming. However, he calms down a bit after Aisha convinces him they've already paid for their crimes, and he agrees that the darkness in the north is more purified. Aisha then thinks of Ivan and if he'd like to see the other elves, but she figures he probably had a hard time in the north while being bullied for being a hybrid, and she also worries that once he regains his emotions, he won't be able to adapt to his new environment. Karnov, also dressed up, appears below her balcony. He tells her Alexei forced him to take her directly to the banquet hall, so he swiftly climbs up the balcony and lifts her in his arms, making her get all flustered while calling her my princess. Yeah. Once in the banquet hall, Lilamri, the leader of the delegation, introduces himself to Aisha, as well as introducing his assistant, Ati. Suddenly, Aisha then steps in between Ati and Karnov as they exchange some menacing looks between one another. Phoebe tells Aisha she doesn't need to protect Karnov as he's more than capable of protecting himself. But Aisha retorts by telling him Ati kept staring at him with ill intentions. Phoebe then tells her it's obvious Ati doesn't want to sign the peace treaty, so they should pay close attention to him and it would probably be wise to keep Ivan hidden for now. Alexei then tells everyone to start dining. It's finally time for dessert, and the head chef brings Aisha's cake in, leaving everyone dumbfounded when he tells them it's named Blumenbasilice, the same name of the land Alexei will be taking following their victory in the war. Aisha's desperate to solve the situation, so she stands up and starts blabbering on how the dessert is supposed to represent peace between their empires, referencing the white bird on top and saying the white cream is supposed to represent the eternity of Blumenbasilice. Well played, my child. She then goes on by saying that they didn't use any dairy products to respect their beliefs, finishing off by saying she prepared it herself with the help of Karnov. They all try it and are quite impressed and delighted with its taste, enlivening Aisha. After the banquet is done, Karnov and Lilamri have a talk alone on the balcony. Lilamri compliments the cake above all else and asks Karnov if he can get the recipe from the head chef. Karnov corrects him, reminding him it was actually made by Aisha, making the leader of the delegation horrified to know Karnov had a hand in making it. Back in the kitchen, Aisha's yelling at Pavel for the name their desserts had, telling him he should have asked her first and it could have ended in a disaster. She then calms down, telling him she's not mad at him as he probably was forced to go along with the name by the head chef. And Pavel tells her that's right, as he asks the head chef to name it because he probably would have named it after her. Aisha then tells him she has urgent work to do, as she wants to write down the carrot cake recipe to give to the delegation. Pavel protests, telling her she's giving away a recipe that's probably worth thousands of gold. However, he's then touched when Aisha tells him that she wants to give it to them nonetheless, as it might help build the peace and future friendship between the empires. Aisha also tells him she wants to prepare a special strawberry coconut milk tea for the delegation as well, to pair with her carrot cake. The delegation is surprised to see Aisha come to their quarters late at night. She tells them she came because Karnov told her they liked her cake, so she wanted to share the recipe with them, adding that she brought some tea she made herself. Lilamri then gives her a small package, telling her he brought it for her but didn't give it to her before because he thought it'd be too simple for her. She's really excited to receive this gift, so she immediately opens it and is happy to see a cute pair of ear warmers, and she puts them on right away. A few days later, Aisha's bedridden as she's become sick again. It seems that cooking drains her of her strength a bit, so after giving it her all in the preparation for the banquet, she's left like this. The emperor sent someone to see Aisha on his behalf, as he's in a political meeting and can't come himself. This person gives Aisha a music box with a glass ballerina on the emperor's behalf, boasting about the luxury of the artifact. It's then that Karnov enters her room, bringing a bouquet of flowers with him once again. The atmosphere instantly changes after his arrival, so Aisha gets everyone to leave them alone. Karnov tells her she was mean to rush the emperor's representative out like that after he brought her a gift, but she tells him she's afraid Karnov wouldn't be at ease. Finally, Aisha grabs his hands and finally decides to be honest with him about his spirit, hoping it would alleviate his struggles a bit. So, she looks him in the eyes and tells him that his spirit is not the spirit of death. Aisha tells him that his spirit is actually the time spirit, giving him a flower and telling him to hold it. He's amazed to see he was able to turn it back into buds, and Aisha looks at him earnestly while telling him his power can also bring back a life, not only take it. Karnov leaves then and starts experimenting with his newfound ability in the garden, while making new flowers bloom. Phoebe then tells Aisha that the time spirit is stronger than the spirit kings, although not stronger than himself, and so that's why he's so concerned she got close to Karnov in order to help him to be able to communicate with his spirit. Aisha's a bit confused, as she thought Phoebe could speak to other spirits without her being able to speak to them, but it turns out that after contracting with a human, he can only speak to the spirits she can speak to herself. Alexei then comes looking for Aisha as the emperor is waiting to meet her. Alexei takes her to a wing far away in the palace, where the emperor greets her. He asks his attendants to leave them alone, when he kneels and asks her since when she can talk to spirits, leaving her shocked. Aisha's terrified after being found out by her grandfather, but she decides to come clean with it and confess she can speak to spirits. She holds his hand and tells him Alexei knows about her ability. And she was planning to tell him, but she was afraid it would put Alyosha in an uncomfortable situation, as she doesn't want him to think she wants to take his place at the throne. The Emperor is moved by her loyalty to Alexei, but then changes the subject and tells her he actually called for her to give her a present as a thanks for her help in the peace treaty, showing her a brand new kitchen built for her own personal use. So guys, what do you think of this story so far? Please subscribe and turn on notifications for updates on this and all our other stories, so you can be the first to find out when they're out. Thank you so much for your support. See you in the next one!